They didn't laugh at me when I pushed through those brass doors, drenched and shaking, with my kid on my hip and a storm chasing us down the block. They stared, like I'd tracked the whole Gulf into their linen napkins. I kept thinking, keep moving, don't freeze, don't let Lila hear your heartbeat doing a drum line in your throat. The maitre d' tried to make the smile reach his eyes. New Orleans politeness. The expensive kind. But his gaze slid right to the puddle forming under my sneakers and the EMT patch on my sleeve. And I could see the math he was doing. Wrong door, wrong crowd. Wrong kind of woman soaking the marble. The room had that fundraiser shine, you know the type. White tablecloths that make you sit up straighter. The soft clink of cutlery, like it's a shame to make noise. A trumpet crying something beautiful and sad from the bandstand. The sign said, Maison d'Or Gala for Children's Health. Funny, I thought. We fit the theme. The air smelled like butter and wine and money and wet nylon and adrenaline. Those were mine. Lila's fingers were stuck to my neck, cold and sticky with rain and powdered sugar, because I'd bribed her with a beignet to run faster. She whispered, Mama, is he here? And I said the lie mothers tell when we need them to keep breathing steady. We're okay, baby, I've got you. But then I looked over my shoulder through the glass and saw the reflection of a sheriff's cruiser idling across the street, and my stomach turned to air. I didn't plan to come in here. I was aiming for a police substation 2 blocks down. Then the radio in my pocket, the same scanner I use on night shifts, caught a voice I knew too well, low and bored and hungry. Unit requesting eyes on Alvarez and Minor. Last seen St. Charles, approach with discretion. He didn't say my name because he's careful. He said it because he wanted me to hear. I took a left without thinking. I thought then everything would flip fast, get inside, blend into the crowd, vanish in the noise. What I didn't expect was the gold-lettered name on the frosted glass, Rourke Hospitality. I'd heard the name like you hear street music, a riff around every corner. Cassian Rourke, the man who built a bouquet of restaurants and jazz clubs out of old bones and new money. I thought, rich man won't notice me. Turns out, I was wrong. We hit the host stand, and my breath hit the wall. The maitre d' lifted a hand like a stop sign in a silk glove. He really did. Ma'am, the private event is... And that was when Lila wriggled down because she's 6 and brave and too smart for her own peace. And she walked right past the velvet rope like it wasn't there. She had her purple raincoat hood still up, little beads from last Mardi Gras tangled in the drawstring like talismans. And she went straight to the table in the corner where a man sat alone, jacket off, sleeves pushed to his forearms like he'd been working, not eating. He wasn't the kind of handsome that glows. He was the kind that pulls a room a half, step tighter without trying. Lila planted her small hands on the linen and said, Clear as the bell that calls shift change. Please help my mom. He said he can take me. He said nobody will look for us because we don't belong to anybody. The band hiccuped. A fork fell somewhere. Somebody's laugh died halfway out, and I just stood there for one breath too long because the truth of her words tore me open. I didn't belong to anyone who could shout a badge. Not anymore. Not since my husband's car crossed the guardrail on I-10, and the report called it fatigue, like grief is a seatbelt you forget to fasten. I swallowed that thought like a stone and crossed the floor. Lila, baby, come back. My voice came out calm, the way I talk on calls to strangers with blood on their shirts. Sir, I'm sorry, we'll go. He didn't look at me first. He looked at my kid, the way medics do, head to toe without touching, pupils, breathing, color, the way shoulders sit when a child has been carrying weight that isn't theirs. Then his eyes lifted to me and landed on the bruise I'd missed, a thumbprint shadow under my jaw I'd covered with drugstore concealer in a moving car. His face didn't change, but some switch flipped in the room, like he'd reached past me and turned down the music in the whole world. What's your name? He asked Lila, voice low enough the tablecloths could have answered. Lila Alvarez, she said, because she's proud of her name, the way kids are when it still tastes new. Lila. He nodded. I'm Cass. He didn't say Rourke. He didn't have to. Is the man who scared you outside? She nodded. eyes too big. He says he's family, she added, and that word made my skin crawl because the way Brian says family sounds like a locked door. I reached for Lila, and the maitre d' reached for me, too. He'd changed his mind. To his credit, when the rain... Glass doors breathed open, and the doorman leaned in just enough to catch Cass's eye. A tilt of the chin. Cass didn't turn to look. He pulled a phone from his pocket, the kind that never rings for ordinary problems, and said into it, "Noah, we have a custody situation at Maison. Black Suburban to Canal and 2. Discretion." He set the phone down like he'd ordered coffee. "Ms. Alvarez," he said to me, somehow knowing, and I felt the air leave my lungs because the badge across the street also knows my name too well. "You came to the right door." I wanted to argue. I wanted to say I'm not the kind of woman who wanders into a man like you and asks for rescue. But Lila's fingers were digging into the linen, and the scanner in my pocket crackled with 2 units converging. And I did the thing that changed everything. I didn't run. "I'm an EMT," I said, because competence is a life raft when pride is drowning. "Single mom. We were en route to the substation when my ex's buddy on the force called our location on an open channel. That wasn't an accident." Cass's eyes tracked the scanner clipped inside my jacket. Then the key I kept rubbing under my phone case without meaning to. A tiny steel thing that buzzed like a hot coal against my palm. He saw all of it and said, "You're hurt." "I'm fine." I lied. Professional. "He grabbed me earlier. He wants leverage." I didn't say whose leverage. I didn't say the part about money changing hands over cases I've ridden in the back of an ambulance. How I heard names in the dark that shouldn't share a sentence. How grief had taught me the shape of a setup. I didn't say the word cartel. Not yet. You don't open with vocabulary like that in a room with crystal chandeliers. Noah was fast. 2 men in suits appeared like the building made them. One taking up space at the entrance, with the kind of posture that says, "Try me." The other melting into a shadow by the bar. The doorman, an older black gentleman I'd seen for years on that corner, did something small and holy. He pressed a still, warm towel into my hand like I was his own kid come in from the rain. "You're safe a minute now," he said, and the way he used a minute, like a unit of grace, put a crack in my armor. "Thank you." I meant it. I wiped Lila's fingers, wiped the powdered sugar streak off her cheek, the last bright thing we'd touched out there, and suddenly the whole room felt like it had to choose what kind of people they were. Some turned away, chasing their oysters. Some watched, trying on concern like a borrowed coat. One woman in a sequined dress stood up and offered Lila her seat without a word. Little choices. They add up. Through the glass, I could see a sheriff's deputy step out of his cruiser and tip his hat to the rain like it was a person he might arrest. Brian Hale stands like he's the only man on a sidewalk built for him. I could see the shape of him in my peripheral vision without looking. My body knows his silhouette, the way you know a bad street by smell. Cass didn't waste breath. "Ms. Alvarez, will you and Lila step into my office?" He said it to me, but his eyes were on the door. I shook my head because he needed to hear this part first. If I go behind another man's door, he'll say I'm hiding. He'll say I'm unstable. He'll use my job against me. It came out more honest than I planned. Cass nodded, like he'd been briefed on a language only women learn. "Okay," he said simply, and changed the plan to fit the person, not the optics. He stood, buttoned nothing, and with a small gesture, the band shifted keys. The lighting warmed. The room's heartbeat synced to his. He walked to the door with me and Lila on either side like we were his blood. He didn't touch us. He didn't need to. Outside, rain stitched silver lines through the French Quarter light. Brian's smile was the kind you bleed on paper cuts. He didn't draw his weapon. He didn't have to in a city that makes room for theater. "Afternoon, Cass," he said. Easy, like they were old parish friends. Funny place to bump into a runaway. "You're off duty, deputy," Cass replied, and didn't bother to put a question mark at the end. Noah stepped forward, and the Suburban nosed the curb just enough to make a point. This is where scenes go sideways in your head, where you picture loud things and hands and headlines. But what happened next felt like a quiet door shutting. Cass didn't throw weight. He threw rules. Child's immediate safety supersedes your say. So, if you have paperwork, show it. If not, get off my steps. Brian glanced at me, then at Lila, and let contempt do the talking. She's dramatic, he told the rain. EMS grief case. You know how they get. My throat burned, but I kept my face blank because I've learned men like Brian take blank as a dare, and I was done giving him dares. Lila pressed closer to my side and whispered, "Mama, please." And the way she said please broke him out of his little performance. He took one step, the kind that makes your feet want to forget they're yours. Noah didn't touch him. He just happened to occupy the exact square foot Brian wanted next. Cass's voice didn't rise when he said, "City ordinance says you're trespassing." Which was almost funny, given who he was and how much of this city he'd rented. "You have 5 seconds to move off my property or I call your boss for my favorites list." Brian held my eyes, long enough to make a promise I wouldn't let him keep. Then he smiled that paper cut again and backed away 1 step, then 2, then turned his hat to the storm like it was a camera and got in his car. He didn't go far. He wouldn't. But I took the breath my lungs had been owed. Inside the lobby again. My hands finally registered the shape I'd been holding all night, the little key taped inside my phone case. I kept thinking it was just a nervous tick, touching it like a rosary. But the truth is, on the worst night of my life, somebody handed me the kind of thing that gets you followed, something you don't open without a plan or a witness. I didn't come here to fall at your feet, I told Cass because I needed to hear myself say it out loud. I came because a man who knows too many doors has keys to mine. He looked at the place my fingers had worried raw, where the plastic had worn shiny, and didn't ask the question out loud. Instead, he said, "You and Lila are going to eat something hot in my office. Then we're going to put on dry clothes. Then, if you want, we'll make a plan where you never have to run like that again. Not from him, not from anyone." The words did something to my posture I didn't expect. It wasn't rescue, it was logistics. It was choice handed back to me. I nodded once because my voice wasn't ready to trust the room. And Lila, who reads people better than most adults, let her shoulders drop. On the way down the hall, we passed the bandstand. The trumpet player, old enough to have taught half the quarter, caught my eye and tipped his horn like a second-line umbrella at a wedding. "Welcome in," he mouthed around the reed. Not welcome back. Welcome in. It's a small thing. It's also everything. I kept thinking, I can do this if I'm not doing it alone. Then the door shut behind us. The storm thudded against the windows like a big, angry heartbeat. And for the first time that day, I said my own name out loud without apologizing for it. Cass didn't start with speeches. He started with towels, soup, and a dry hoodie that smelled like cedar and laundry day. And the weirdest thing was how normal it felt to sit in a rich man's office and teach my daughter how to breathe in sets of 4, while the storm knocked on the windows like it was trying to sell us something we didn't want. Lila kept her eyes on the steam rising off the gumbo and repeated my count: 4, in, hold for 2, out for 6, like it was a spell. Cass watched without inserting himself, which, to me, said more than a promise ever could. When she was finally steady, he slid a legal pad across the desk and said, "You tell me the rules and we'll build around you." I didn't expect that. Men like Brian write rules on other people's skin. Men like Cass weren't supposed to ask. I took the pen because competence calms me and wrote 3 lines. No surprises. Everything said once in front of Lila is the truth. If I say stop, we stop. He didn't argue. He just handed me a phone I'd never seen before and said, "New number, prepaid. I'll teach you how to move between lines without leaving footprints." It wasn't romantic, it was logistics. That's the love language I trust. The next morning we met in the kitchen before the staff rolled in. Maison d'Or looks like another universe out front. But back of house is stainless steel, tile, soft radio static, and a clock that sets the tempo of an army. He had coffee going like he'd done it himself before money made that optional. And he laid out a map of our block with a calm that made my shoulders drop a half inch. 2 right turns and a left, he said, tapping routes with a chef's knife like it was a pointer. If you think you're being followed, that pattern exposes amateurs. If it's not safe to go home, you go to Rouse's or Walgreens, public, cameras, witnesses. If you need extraction, you call and say, the gumbo's too salty. If you send that by text, we come silent. If you send it as a voice memo, we come loud. I nodded because those are the kinds of specifics that stop a brain from inventing horrors. I added my own. 3 rings means I can't talk. 1 word replies only. If I text the word second line, you lock this building down. He didn't blink. He just wrote it next to mine like we were building a menu and safety was the entree. Before lunch service, I asked the chef for 10 minutes with the line cooks and servers. They looked skeptical. Most kitchens do when an EMT shows up with a rolling case. I know this isn't a Red Cross class, I told them, but the truth is, you're first responders whether you want the title or not. I showed them how to make a tourniquet with a kitchen towel and a wooden spoon, how to pack a wound with bar towels you boil later, how to turn a sandwich bag and a dab of olive oil into a chest seal that buys a stranger a chance. One of the younger servers, nose ring, bright eyes, still working out how to take up space, asked me if I shake after scenes. Sometimes, I said, and didn't pretend to be a superhero. Sometimes I eat Zapp's chips in my car and cry with the windows up. Sometimes I sit very still. The trick is you let it move through and not set up shop in your ribs. When we finished, the chef popped open the spice drawer and pulled out a little purple plastic king cake baby like it was a medal. He placed it in my palm and said, "For luck, or to remind you not to choke." It made me laugh, which is maybe why I didn't notice Cass watching from the doorway, with that expression people get when they see a thing they didn't know they needed. We didn't keep Lila home and huddle. Kids smell fear like dogs smell storms. I walked her to the car with Noah trailing at the distance. We agreed on visible to grown-ups, invisible to a 6-year-old. And we drove the long way to school, taking those 2 rights and a left like a prayer flag. On the way, she asked the kind of questions that sound simple and aren't. Is Mr. Bryan mad because he doesn't have a family? Does the rain make people tell the truth? Do we belong to anybody? I told her we belong to each other, and to Miss Bernice next door who waters our plants and yells at kids who drop their Coke cans in her azaleas, and to our crew at the station who send me ridiculous memes when I pull doubles, and to the whole city when the siren flips and folks move their cars out of the lane like it's choreography. At the school gate, I pulled a little green Mardi Gras bead out of my pocket and clipped it to her backpack. "See this?" I said. "If a grown-up tells you to go with them and they don't have this bead, you stay put and yell your loudest voice." She nodded like I'd given her a sword. After drop off, I swung by my apartment, the one Brian knows too well, and took what I could carry, 4 photo strips with my husband making faces, Lila's baby book with the hospital band taped inside, the scanner that works better than the stations on a good day. Miss Bernice was leaning on her railing with her hair wrapped and a coffee mug that said Saints by 20. She clocked the 2 men in the car across the street, cocked an eyebrow like she was unimpressed with their spy game, and called, "Baby, you need anything you don't already have?" I told her I needed luck, and maybe a St. Joseph medal if she had one. She disappeared and came back with a medallion on a thin chain and a Ziploc of pecan pralines. "Men who throw their weight around don't know what to do with a woman who's fed," she said, and patted my cheek. "Also, I recorded those 2 fools last night smoking by my magnolias. If they work for who I think, somebody's HR is about to hear Ms. Bernice's voice." I almost cried right there in the stairwell. It wasn't the medal. It was being seen and believed by a woman who knows the city's soft places and sharp edges better than any map. Back at Maison, Cass had already met with a woman named Gloria, who runs a little therapy office off Magazine Street with a waiting room full of fidget toys and a dog that wears a bow tie. "For Lila," he said, sliding me a business card only after asking if therapy was something I agreed with. "We can cover the cost, or we can pretend insurance is being competent today." I said yes before my pride could build an argument, because healing isn't a moral contest. It's a toolbox. Then I did something I promised myself I would do differently this time. I asked what his rules were. If I was going to let a man pull nets around my life, I needed to know what he thought nets were for. He didn't dodge. He told me about his uncle, who believed fear was a currency, and about how he learned to count exits before he learned to cook an omelet. He told me what it costs to make a business clean when dirty money thinks it's owed interest on your soul. He didn't confess. He reported, like a man paying taxes he's done hiding from. "I'm trying to do this without breaking more than I fix," he said. And there was a kind of tired in his eyes that didn't ask me to absolve it. "You're allowed to hold me to that." Somewhere around noon, the doorman, Mr. Leon, who'd handed me that warm towel like a sacrament, poked his head into the kitchen and said, "You got a minute?" He led me to the front, where a woman in a sequined jacket from last night stood with a paper bag and a look that said she'd argued with herself in the car. "I didn't do right by you," she blurted before I could say hello. I watched and thought empathy real hard, and then kept eating my oysters. She handed me the bag. Inside was a brand new set of noise, canceling headphones with unicorns because apparently they make those, and a note in careful penmanship for the next loud place that isn't your choice. I don't collect apologies for sport, but there are little repairs that keep a city from becoming a scar. I hugged her and told her the truth, that it matters when people fix a thing while the paint's still wet. Leon winked at me over her shoulder like he was clocking a different kind of security, community, the kind that doesn't need a badge. By late afternoon, the plan had bones, new phone, new routes, new drop points, a Walgreens, a church that keeps its doors open, a coffee shop in the Bywater where the barista knows 3 kinds of danger, and how to dial 911 without looking. We added a go bag to the trunk with Lila's favorite hoodie, a toothbrush, a list of allergies, and a Polaroid of the 3 of us from a booth at the Riverwalk last summer that still smelled like sunscreen and cheap hot dogs. Noah gave me a lesson in what he called civilian counter-surveillance that sounded dramatic until he demonstrated how much you can see in the reflection of a bus window if you put your body at an angle. I showed him how to turn kitchen gloves into makeshift barriers when you need to check somebody's pulse, and the bar sink is your ER. He laughed and said, "I can't wait to put Mayo Clinic of Bourbon Street on my resume." And then he sobered and told me quietly that he'd been a cop once and left because the good ones were getting tired faster than the bad ones were getting fired. We didn't say Brian's name. We didn't have to. Around dusk, when New Orleans does that thing where it looks like a movie and a memory at the same time, Cass came to find us by the back door with a bag of takeout and 2 folding camp chairs like we were tailgating the end of a hard day. "We earned outside," he said, and we sat under the little overhang listening to the rain drip from the gutter in a rhythm that could have been a drumline from a high school parade. He didn't ask me to tell my whole life story. He asked me what song Lila falls asleep to on bad nights and wrote down Hallelujah because it's her weird little comfort. And he said he'd have the trumpet player learn it in a slow key for closing time the next week. Just in case music is medicine. He asked what grocery store I miss when I'm on nights, and I said Rouse's shrimp salad like a reflex. And he said he'd have someone stock the staff fridge because nobody makes good choices when dinner is panic. He asked if it was okay to walk me and Lila to the car after closing, or if that felt like pressure. Consent is a tiny word, but it travels far. Before we went inside, my fingers found that little key again, taped under my phone case, hot as an ember. The habit is muscle memory now. Check it, count it, keep it. I caught him noticing, and for the first time since last night, I let him ask the question with his eyes. "It opens a box," I said. "The kind people keep for terrible days." I didn't say whose box or how it came to me or what it might set on fire if we ever use it. I just said, "If we're doing rules, add this one. When I open that, I don't do it alone." He didn't press. He just nodded, slow and sure, like a man who knows some doors don't need to be knocked on until you've got the right witnesses. Then he stood, offered Lila the takeout like a magician showing an empty hat, and said, "Tonight we eat po' boys on the office floor and pretend the storm is just the Saints winning ugly." Lila giggled and rolled her eyes like kids do when adults try too hard. And for 10 minutes, the world was small and bright and made of breadcrumbs and hot sauce and the sound of 3 people chewing like a choir. I went to bed in a room with a lock I chose, and a white noise machine that sounded like a soft river. I stared at the ceiling long enough to inventory every shadow, and learned the shapes weren't threats. Just a coat rack and a lamp and the outline of a chair where Lila had piled her unicorn headphones and that green bead like trophies. I kept thinking. I can't afford to trust, and I can't afford not to. Somewhere in the night, the scanner on my nightstand crackled with the innocuous sounds of a city too alive to sleep. Traffic stops, a cat in a dumpster, someone calling in a noise complaint about a second, line that should have ended an hour ago and didn't because joy is stubborn here. I listened like I always do, tracking danger by sound. Then I did something I haven't done in a long time. I turned it off and let my eyes close before the storm did. Tomorrow, I teach the morning staff how to use the bleed kit, and call Gloria about an intake for Lila and pick up my next shift schedule because rent still wants its due. Tomorrow, I'd ask Cass why a man who pretends he's just a restaurateur knows how to peel a tail casually while laying out counter-surveillance patterns like recipes. Tomorrow, maybe, I'd tell him there's more in that box than numbers. Tonight, the rule was simple. Breathe in 4, hold for 2, out for 6, and try believing, just for the span of a song, that building a plan can be its own kind of prayer. I didn't sleep long. My brain kept looping the same 3 beats. Brian's smile in the rain, Cass's voice steady like a metronome, the tiny key taped under my phone case, heating my skin like a warning. By 9, I decided I was done letting that key own my pulse. We dropped Lila at school. She held up her backpack so I could see the green bead and said, "I remember," like a soldier reporting to a commander. And I kissed her forehead and promised myself we were going to be the kind of people who keep promises. Then I drove to Cyprus Mutual Credit Union on Magazine Street, the one with the mural of a pelican carrying groceries. Miss Bernice came because she said no woman should open a box alone the first time, and because she had opinions about paperwork and she likes to make bank managers sweat in the name of service. Inside smelled like printer ink and peppermint. The teller asked for 2 forms of ID and made me sign the ledger with a pen on a skinny chain. "It's been a while," she said, glancing at the name on the index card. "Who opened it?" "My husband," I said, and the word didn't break me in half like I feared it would. The vault door opened on that slow, heavy hinge sound that makes you want to hold your breath. The attendant slid out a metal tray from box 312 and left us alone in a little cubicle with a table like a school desk. For a minute, I just stared at it. I kept thinking about the night I found the key, taped under Michael's side of the dresser, a week before his accident. How I'd asked a casual question about their new lockbox at the station, and he'd kissed my shoulder and said, "You know I'm bad at secrets." Except he'd been very good at this one. I peeled the tape off my phone case and set the key on the metal like dropping a coin in a wishing well. It fit. Of course it did. Inside was a cheap spiral notebook, a manila envelope with my initials in block letters the way Michael wrote our rent checks, and a micro SD card in a case labeled REC W597. There was also a Polaroid of Michael and me on a parade route, me covered in beads and powdered sugar, him with his LSU cap backward and a leaf stuck in his hair. Someone had written, "Proof we were happy," on the white part with a Sharpie. The envelope had a single page, handwritten. "If you're reading this, something went sideways. Don't show this to anybody who thinks power is a personality trait. Call this number and say, 'I'm cashing the CD.'" The number had a name next to it. Patel. I folded the paper because the shape of it felt like a life raft and slid it into my pocket. Then I opened the notebook. It wasn't his journal. It was a ledger, dates, names, amounts, short notes in a shorthand we'd teased each other about during tax season because he'd grown up writing down every dollar. And I'd grown up counting pennies out loud so you hear the math. There were notations like Delta Refinery B and Unit 14 off 1920-23 Huntwood. Cam down. Work order signed by B. B had a circle around it every time. Some lines had addresses. One had mine. My vision fuzzed at the edges, and I told myself it was low blood sugar because denial is a skilled liar. I looked at the SD card, and my palms started sweating. Miss Bernice reached across and put her hand on mine the way church ladies do when they don't have the right words, but they've got the right grip. "Baby," she said. And that was all. I put the card back for a second because I didn't want to hear my life explode in stereo in a bank vault. I called Cass. I told him where I was and what I had and what I wasn't going to do without a plan. He didn't say "good girl," which would have ended this partnership. He said, "Stay put. I'm coming with counsel." 10 minutes later, he was there with a lawyer who looked like he had been awake since Katrina and never went back to bed. Preston Guidry, soft voice, hard eyes. He didn't reach for anything. He asked me to photograph the notebook pages with my phone, to photograph the SD card in my hand next to the box number. Then he did the chain of custody dance like we'd rehearsed it. We played the first file in his office an hour later with the blinds closed and Noah standing in the hall posting up like a human lockdown. The audio was ugly, not because of shouting, but because of the absence of it. 2 male voices in a warehouse with reverb. One I knew like a bad song, the lazy, bored tone Brian gets when he's describing things he thinks only men like him deserve to hear. The other voice lower, older, careful. "Refinery," Brian said. And it wasn't sugar they were talking about. "Collateral is the mom and the kid." He went on like he was ordering lunch. "Nobody's going to miss them. She's got no people." And then, the part that made my ribcage feel too small. A third voice, tinny, on speaker. A woman's office quiet in the background, saying, "If you want this to wash clean, push the paperwork through B. Same as last time. Fatigue. Maintenance order on cam 14. Close by end of shift." They didn't say the full name. They didn't have to. I knew that initial from the ledger and from the way good people in my city say "untouchable" without moving their mouths. I didn't throw up. I didn't scream. I went silent the way I do when a call goes from manageable to "someone just moved the line." Cass didn't touch me. He set a glass of water on the desk and waited. "If we take this to the wrong cop," I said, and the rest hung in the air. Preston nodded. "We go federal, and we go fast," he said. "We do not post, we do not whisper. We document, duplicate, deliver, and Maya," he added, looking at me instead of looking past me, "we do not put your name on the first page." It felt like the first time a man in a suit had included me in the plan, and not as a witness to my own train wreck. Cass said, "There's a gala tonight for the clinic fund. Press will be there. Brian will try to paint you as unstable, and me as the rich man who steals other men's families. He'll say the quiet part loud because he thinks loud is truth." I didn't ask how he knew. I've learned some men can read a city's next move better than they can read a recipe. "What do you want to do?" he asked me. And that was the question that mattered. I thought about the SD card in my pocket and how it could blow a hole in the floor under all of us. I thought about Lila sleeping with her new unicorn headphones on and the green bead clipped to her bag. I thought about how violence is gravity and how I am tired of falling. "We make it about facts," I said. "We don't make it about me." Maison dressed itself up nice that night. The staff put tea lights in old jam jars because fancy doesn't have to mean cold. The band tuned slow. The sign said "all proceeds to the clinic" Cass swore he was going to fund, even if he had to sell a restaurant to seat it. People who signed big checks showed up in good clothes and better intentions. And the local news did that community in action voiceover before the anchors forget everybody's names by morning. I worked the back till it started. I stocked the first aid kit and tightened a chair leg and tucked a couple of EpiPens where servers could reach them without thinking. Mr. Leon adjusted his tie and told me he once bounced a senator without breaking a sweat. "Power is loud until it meets a door that knows its hinge," he said. And I smiled because that man has poetry he hides in his jacket pocket with the mints. At 8, you could feel the moment the narrative arrived. Brian walked in with 2 officers and a smile for the cameras. He didn't flash his weapon because he's a pro at theater. He flashed a folded paper like it was a warrant. It wasn't. It was a concern for welfare printout, the kind you can scare civilians with if they don't know you typed it yourself. The reporter who draws eyeliner like it's a weapon turned and pointed her mic, hungry for a soundbite. "Deputy Hale, what brings you here?" He didn't even pretend to be neutral. "Protecting the public," he said. "This establishment is harboring a woman in a mental health crisis and a minor in danger. We've received credible reports of extortion and—" He might have kept going if the trumpet player hadn't played a single long note like he'd stepped on a live wire. It wasn't loud, it was right. Cass didn't step on a chair or clap his hands. He just stepped into the soft space between the cameras and the crowd and said, "I'd like to show you something before rumors get names." Noah dimmed the room a hair. The projectors on the back wall woke up. 2 screens. Nothing dramatic, just a timestamp, a location overlay from a freight yard by the river, and an audio waveform. Preston stood beside Cass like a notary at a wedding. "These files were delivered to council today through a compliance channel our company maintains," Cass said. "They have already been copied to a federal office and to the state inspector general. We are not here to try a case in public. We are here to correct the record before innocent people get crushed under a story told by a man with a microphone." Then he hit play. Brian didn't flinch until his own voice filled the room. I watched his mouth go still in the exact way a man does when he realizes a mirror was on him the whole time. The words rolled out. Refinery, collateral, mom and kid, flat like a grocery list. Then the woman's voice with the office hum in the background. "B can wash it." Somebody near the bar exhaled hard, like they'd been hit in the stomach. Phones went up anyway. Because people will be people. And Preston said, "Please put your cameras down, or you'll make it harder for the prosecutors you say you want." Enough people obeyed that it felt like the room had chosen to lean into decency for once. Brian did what men like him do when the earth shifts. He laughed. "Audio can be edited," he said, which is true. Most things can. "This is a smear by a man who wants to distract from his own crimes." Cass didn't smile. "Then we invite you to bring your unedited conscience to the U.S. attorney tomorrow morning," he said, "because that's where these files will be sitting with a nice pot of coffee." The reporter blinked because that doesn't usually happen. Men like Cass don't usually walk their own paperwork into federal buildings unless they're very sure the math is on their side. A voice piped up from the back then, sequin jacket lady from last night, holding up her phone like a relic. "And if audio makes you itchy," she said loud enough for her own redemption, "I have video of 2 of your concerned citizens smoking on Ms. Bernice's Magnolia talking about per diem and your cut." She didn't look at me. She looked at the camera, steady. "We're done pretending we don't hear what we hear." Mr. Leon made a satisfied sound low in his chest, like a man who just watched a lock click. I hadn't planned to say anything because I didn't want to be the face of a fight that could swallow my kid whole. But the reporter turned to me anyway, probably because she saw underdog when she looked at my shoes. "Ms. Alvarez, do you have a comment?" I stepped forward only as far as I wanted and kept my hands where I could see them. "Please keep my child out of your story," I said. "You can say there's a mother who knows how to get a pulse back with a bar towel and a prayer, and a city who still moves their cars when a siren comes up behind them. You can say there are good cops who are exhausted and bad ones who are loud. You can say we're asking for due process instead of a circus. But you don't get to say my kid's name on the 6 o'clock. It came out steady, not righteous. And it did what I needed. It made 3 people in the front row lower their phones and look like human beings again. The reporter swallowed and nodded and said, "We can do that." And for once I believed a TV person's words at face value. Brian started for the door because it's hard to exit a room when you're carrying the shape of your own voice. He paused by me just long enough to try and land one more cut. "You think this little show stops anything?" he murmured, too quiet for the mic. Not quiet enough for my ears. "You don't know how high the ladder goes." He was right about one thing. The ledger in my bag had a name with a B, and a title that made people bow out of habit, the untouchable. I looked him in the face and thought about how gravity works. "I don't need to know how high," I said. "I only need to know how to hold a line." Then I turned away first, which doesn't sound like much until you realize men like him grade your worth on whether you flinch. He left, and the room did that thing where it realizes it has to return to normal breathing. The trumpet player lifted his horn like a blessing and slid into hallelujah the way the song was meant. A little broken. True. After, back in the office, while staff counted tips and Preston built an email with attachments and words like chain of custody and metadata, I sat on the floor with Lila's backpack in my lap because touching things I can name keeps me from floating off the planet. Cass crouched so our eyes were level. "I didn't say your name," he said, like a promise kept should be accounted for. "I know," I said. "Thank you for letting facts do the talking." He nodded and then looked at the notebook like it was a live wire. "The bee," he started, and I shook my head. "Not tonight," I said. "Tonight, I get to tell my kid we did a brave thing without breaking something we can't fix." He sat back on his heels and let out a breath I didn't know he'd been holding. "You know," he said, half smile, not for show. "My uncle used to say there are two kinds of power, what you can take and what people will hand you twice. I'm trying to be the second kind." I believed him in that minute because I could see the first kind still living in the way his hand closed around a glass and how he set it down gently like he was practicing a new religion. Before I left, I tucked the key back into my phone case because muscle memory doesn't surrender just because a room clapped for the right reason. I texted Gloria to set Lila's therapy intake for Thursday, and I sent a picture of the Polaroid to my own number in case the world wanted to eat another piece of proof that we were happy once. On the way out, Mr. Leon pressed a little St. Joseph card into my palm because men who've worked doors for 30 years know what to hand a woman when she's walking into the rest of her life. "He's for workers and lost causes," he said, "and I don't believe in lost causes." I smiled and said goodnight and stepped into a city still damp with rain and gossip. I kept thinking, this was the first time in a long time where the truth didn't get shoved into a corner and told to be quiet. We hadn't solved anything yet. We just pulled a thread. But sometimes that's all a day asks of you. Pull one true thing into the light and dare it to stay. The morning after the gala felt like the city took a deeper breath and decided to watch what we do next. News vans drifted off like gulls after a storm, but the phones didn't stop. Preston kept saying things like intake complete and preservation letter sent, which I translated for myself as, the truth has a paper trail now, not just a pulse. Cass didn't strut. He made coffee and opened his laptop at the corner of a stainless table like any man starting a shift. And that small decision set the tone. We weren't going to win with swagger. We were going to win with spreadsheets and signatures and boring, righteous work. Before lunch, I sat across from him with a legal pad and wrote the header in block letters so my hand couldn't pretend I wasn't serious. Non-negotiables. I read them out loud because saying things out loud makes them real. 1. Transparency. No surprises, no side doors. 2. Lila's safety, therapy, school, low, visibility protection I approve in advance. 3. No dirty money touching our life. If it can't pass a daylight test, it doesn't pay for her backpack. 4. Legal channels only when someone hurts us next. No vigilante fantasies, no just this once. 5. You document how you're exiting whatever back halls you used to walk, and you let a stranger in a suit check your math. Cass didn't argue. He added his own in clean handwriting like a man making vows. 1. Your say. So is law in this building when it comes to your child. 2. The clinic fund gets seeded now, not someday. 3. Gloria gets whatever she needs for Lila, and I don't get credit for it. 4. I'll show you my books, the actual ones, not the pretty ones. 5. If the past knocks, we answer with a lawyer, not a fist. Then he signed and dated it with a pen old enough to have seen better men forget promises. And he had Preston countersign like this was a contract, not a romance. We taped a copy to the back of the office door with blue painter's tape and put another under a magnet shaped like a crawfish on the staff fridge. And the cook who saw it nodded like he'd just seen a fire escape get installed. I took Layla to Gloria's office that afternoon, The dog with the bow tie, his name was Franklin, did the real work. And Gloria mostly watched the way Lila's shoulders climbed when I talked and dropped when I sang along with the cheap white noise machine. "We'll start with stories she can control," Gloria said, then move gently toward the ones she can't. On the drive home, Lila asked if therapy is like school and if she'd get a sticker. And I told her sometimes the sticker is just sleeping through the night without the monsters remembering your address. Back at Maison, the staff had turned the VIP corner of the bar, the one that used to feel like a secret handshake, into a little reading nook with 2 bookcases and a sign that said Maison Lending Library. Take 1. Leave 1 in Mr. Leon's tidy script. Somebody had already left a stack of kids' paperbacks and a battered copy of The Color Purple, with a coffee ring on the back and a note that said, "This one saved my life." It sounds small. It felt like a border had been repainted. The pushback came fast and predictable. By evening, Cass had a family meeting that wasn't Thanksgiving but smelled like it. Perfume, old grudges, casseroles of opinion. His Uncle Declan arrived first, the one who thinks fear is legal tender, and he walked the back hall like he owned the paint. "You don't just walk off a map, boy," he told Cass in the tone old men use to maintain empires from their recliners. "You retire pieces carefully. You don't tell the whole parish where you're going." Cass didn't rise. He pointed at the non-negotiables on the door like he was pointing to an exit sign. "I'm not asking," he said, and I heard the kind of calm that scares bullies more than yelling ever will. "I'm informing. We're selling the cold storage lease on Claiborne. We're closing the private room at Blue Finch. And we're hiring a compliance officer who reports to a board that includes somebody who doesn't owe us dinner." Declan laughed, which is how men like him cry. "You think you can launder a soul?" he said. "You think paperwork makes you righteous?" I didn't speak. This wasn't my blood. And I've learned not to step between history and the wall it wants to punch. But I stood where Cass could see me. Sometimes the point is to be a witness, so the good thing doesn't feel like a hallucination. "I think paperwork makes it harder to lie," Cass said, and slid a folder across the table with words like divestiture term sheet and independent director, two-lane law. Declan skimmed the first page, looked up at me as if I was the mosquito in his whiskey, and said, low, "You're going to ruin this family." I tucked my hands in my pockets so I didn't cross my arms like a teenager. "Sir," I said, keeping my voice where a camera wouldn't fall in love with it, "families don't break when they stop hurting people. They break when they forget they can choose to." Next morning, Cass called a full staff meeting. He stood on a milk crate because the PA was busted and spoke like a man who's been on both sides of the kitchen door. "If any of you ever felt like you had to play dumb when a cop asked the wrong questions or pretend you didn't see who slipped in the side door, that ends now. If anyone tries to make you feel small for doing the right thing, they can eat at someone else's table." He announced a partnership with a community clinic in Central City, leasing a shuttered pharmacy space, covering the build out, staffing 2 nights a week with volunteer docs from Tulane and Xavier, and a nurse practitioner who ran Hurricane Ida shelters without losing a single patient. "We'll host fundraisers where the money passes through clean hands into clean boxes," he said. "And if you want to help, help. If you don't, don't. Either way, nobody gets leaned on." After, the dishwasher I'd given a tourniquet lesson to raised his chin and said, "Miss Maya said we boil bar towels if they get blood." Half proud, half testing if the new rules included bodies we care about. "Miss Maya's right," Cass said. "We boil what we have and we buy better if we can." It landed. Culture doesn't change on a memo. It changes when the boss says the quiet, necessary thing in front of the line. I started writing our own SOP, house rules for a life that wasn't running anymore. I put them on note cards because note cards fit in a pocket. Morning, Lila to school with the bead, me to station or maison depending on shift. Noon, check in with Gloria, check the scanner but don't marry it. Afternoon, if Declan calls, don't pick up alone. Evening, walk the block, know the shop owners by name, say hi to Miss Bernice, and take a praline if she offers, because you can't fight on an empty stomach, and you shouldn't fight in front of azaleas. We added a walking school bus after two moms from the block texted me unprompted to say, "We saw the news. If you ever need us to do a lap round dismissal, we already in leggings." The first day we did it, 5 grown women and a dozen kids, strung out like a little parade. One of the cafeteria workers stepped onto the sidewalk and handed out leftover apples like blessings. The resource officer nodded and said, "Y'all doing my job better than me." And I said, "We can all do it better together." And for once it didn't sound corny. There were quiet wins that no one will ever film. The night manager at the Walgreens learned Lila by sight and moved the rack of plush toys closer to the front so we could make quick exits without tears. Mr. Leon started keeping a spare umbrella with a bright yellow duck head for littles who need joy at the door. The trumpet player added "Hallelujah" to his closing set on Thursdays and didn't announce it. He just learned the key that doesn't wake toddlers. Preston hired a woman named Marla, who'd done compliance for a hospital system and survived 6 CEOs without losing her ethics. And she showed up with a binder thicker than a Bible and a face that said she'd wrestled worse than us. "We'll map every cash flow," she told me in the break room. "And if I find a line that points toward something ugly, I pull the fire alarm and we all practice running outside calmly." I wanted to adopt her. Not everything went down easy. A cousin named Finn, who handles contracts for the riverfront properties, came in hot and red and called Cass a traitor, in a voice that carried into the dining room and made a tourist from Ohio look up from his shrimp and grits like he'd paid for this show. Cass walked him to the alley behind the kitchen, where we all go to breathe, and told him the plan again, slow, like he had all day. "We move the trucks off the river," he said. "We build the clinic. We add an independent to the board. We stop pretending the VIP door is a charitable act." Finn looked at me like I'd cast a spell and said, "You turned him soft." I thought about all the ways men recode change so it doesn't make sense to them. "He turned himself human," I said. "I'm just here to make sure he doesn't forget." Finn spat near a drain and said the refinery word like a dare. "You don't even know where the bones are buried," he told Cass. And Cass said, very gently, "I know enough to stop adding to the pile." It should have been the end of it. It wasn't. Later, when the kitchen was quiet, Cass admitted Finn had a point about one thing. Quitting isn't just walking away. Quitting is closing doors other people still want to use. "I'm going to make enemies," he said. "New ones, old ones that feel owed. You sure you want to stand in this kitchen with me when they show up?" I told him the truth. "I'm not here because I think you're bulletproof. I'm here because I'm tired of men choosing the easiest wrong and asking women to decorate it." He laughed without joy, like a man recognizing a family portrait. We went to a city council subcommittee hearing about conditional use for the clinic, because that's how American Hope gets its stamp. The room had bad acoustics and better people than rules. And we waited 2 hours while the body that sets noise fines for Bourbon Street argued about decibel meters. When it was our turn, I said my name into a microphone that smelled like Lysol and fear, and told them what an EMT knows. If you make a safe place where folks can get their blood pressure checked and a flu shot and a referral without getting humiliated, 911 calls drop. A pastor from Tremay spoke after me about funerals he didn't want to do. A woman from the neighborhood laced her testimony with jokes because that's how we ask for mercy and keep our pride. The vote wasn't unanimous, but it was yes. And when the clerk stamped the permit, Cass squeezed my hand under the table once, quick, like a man saying grace in public. That night, after Lila fell asleep with Franklin's bow tie tucked in her pillowcase because she'd decided it was good luck, I sat at the little table by the window and spread out the ledger pages again next to the non-negotiables. The B was still there, a letter that stood for a door we hadn't opened yet. I wasn't naive. I knew this day's work didn't topple anything bigger than a teacup, but I felt something I hadn't felt since before Michael died. Alignment. Like the work in my hands matched the words in my mouth. I texted Cass a photo of the fridge magnet holding our contract and typed, "The crawfish says we're serious." He sent back a picture of his signature on a sale agreement for the Claiborne lease and wrote, "Daylight test, passed." I didn't melt. I filed it in the part of my brain that keeps people honest. Before bed, I read Lila one of the paperbacks from the lending shelf. At the end, she said, "Mama, are we good guys?" She meant it simple. I wanted to give her an answer that would still be true in 20 years. "We're trying to be," I said. "Good isn't perfect. Good is steady. Good is telling the truth when it's easier to be quiet." She nodded like that was enough, then asked if we could bring cookies to Miss Bernice tomorrow, because helpers need snacks. I said yes because that's theology where I come from. When the scanner cracked alive later with the usual late night chorus, sirens, somebody's drunk uncle singing Trouble, I turned the volume down but didn't turn it off. You can make peace without pretending danger moved to another city. Around midnight, a text from an unknown number pinged my new phone. "We should talk. I'm Patel." I stared at the name Michael had written next to that number in the envelope, the handwriting that still knew how to find me. I didn't answer. Not yet. Tomorrow we'd make room at the table for federal agents and bigger maps in the B that stood for more than one person. Tonight, I stood in the quiet of a kitchen we'd claimed and looked at a page that said, "Non-negotiables in thought." This is what rebuilding looks like in America. A dog with a bow tie, a board vote, a contract, a bead clipped to a backpack, a man with money choosing boring over legendary, a mother counting her child's breaths in sets of 4, and deciding where her line is and who's allowed to cross it. City Park on a Saturday looks like the whole city remembered how to breathe. Soccer teams in mismatched docks, dads trying to light grills that don't want to cooperate, babies with snowball mustaches running in zigzags under those ancient oaks like they own the grass. I took Lila because routine is medicine. We were meeting the walking school bus moms by the playground so the kids could burn energy while we gossiped about teacher wish lists and who still owes money for field trip shirts. I kept the scanner on low in my tote like always. Habit, not paranoia, I told myself. And we found a patch of shade near the big slide. Lila was in her purple raincoat because she insists it's lucky even on clear days. Unicorn headphones looped over her neck, green bead clipped to her bag like a badge. She ran to chase a soccer ball with the other kids, and I made a mental note to buy her new sneakers because you can hear when a kid's shoes are starting to slap. I was halfway through a story about a station prank gone wrong when the scanner caught a whisper that did not belong to any dispatch I know. Eyes on purple hoodie, green string, confirm mom at bench, Team B, swing to Storyland gate. The voice had that cheap radio hiss, like a $40 walkie from a big box sporting goods store. Not police. I felt that drop, like an elevator stopped between floors, and time slowed. I heard every leaf, every squeak of the swings, and the silly pump, spray sound the snowball truck makes when it blasts syrup. I kept my face neutral because kids read faces like billboards. I picked up my phone and hit Cass's contact, then remembered the rule and sent a voice memo instead. "The gumbo's too salty." Loud response, not quiet. I stood like I was just stretching and said to the moms, "Easy. Hey, let's do the red light, green light thing." And they didn't ask why because women know the tone. We clapped and yelled, "Red light." And 20 kids froze like army men at attention. I caught Lila's eye and pointed to my bead. She nodded like we practiced and veered toward me. The next voice on my scanner wasn't the same. It was more local, 2 blocks down. Direction, probably the parking loop by the sculpture garden. Copy. Van 3 is stuck by traffic. Team C, move. Then there was a code word I'd heard at the gala on the recording. Ugly and boring all at once. Refinery. It landed like a rock in my gut. I didn't run. I started narrating out loud for my own brain like I do on calls. 2 men pretending to be uncles by the swings, one by the gate, a van idling where it shouldn't idle, a mom who is not going to let them write her life. I told the mom sitting with me, red light means freeze. If a strange adult touches your kid, you scream, "I don't know you," until birds leave the trees. One of the moms, Tasha, who runs the snowball stand between gigs, didn't wait for instructions. She hopped in her truck and pulled it across the parking lot exit like a stubborn shopping cart. Another, Miss Etta, who walks every morning with hand weights and more opinions than God, pulled a referee whistle from her fanny pack and absolutely shattered the air. "Time out!" she roared with the authority of a woman who has both coached and survived PTA. Heads turned. The men by the swings flinched from attention like roaches when the kitchen light flips. Noah hit the curb a minute later like he'd been growing out of the asphalt. He didn't swagger. He just existed where bad plans like to move. He took one look at the two uncles, said, "Afternoon," in a voice that sounded like legal consequences, and put his hands in his pockets in a way that made it clear he didn't need them to win. The guy by the gate reached for a child who wasn't mine. God, that shake, and found Miss Etta's whistle in his ear, and a lacrosse dad placing a hand like a cinder block on his shoulder, the polite southern version of, "Not today." I grabbed Lila and 3 other kids closest to me and moved them behind the biggest oak. "New game," I said. Light, like I wasn't vibrating. "Everybody wall like a tree, hug your knees, count ants." Lila tucked in and counted like she meant it. The scanner popped again. "Abort, refinery says abort, refinery, refinery." It's funny what panic does to people. It makes them repeat the one word that will burn their throat later. One of the men did something I've seen 1,000 times in different clothes. He tried to blend into a crowd that was suddenly all eyes. He started talking fast. "We're family, you got it wrong." But his gaze kept cutting to the van that Tasha had effectively blocked with a lifted Tacoma and a "don't mess with my livelihood" stare. I saw the kit tucked half out of his backpack, a hard case like a camera bag but too slim, zip ties, duct tape, nitrile gloves, a small vial of something I couldn't read from distance. It doesn't take chloroform to ruin a life. It takes planning, and the kind of laziness that assumes women won't look. I did the thing my body knows best. I turned myself into a scene manager. "You," I said to the lacrosse dad, "step left, you," to the teen with a skateboard. "Park your board in front of his shoes." To Noah, "Left pocket, eyes, get his phone if you can." To Tasha, who was already filming, "Keep the lens wide, we want faces and plates." Everything happened without noise we didn't need. The man by the gate made a move like he thought he could outrun shame. He tripped over the skateboard and went down on his palms hard enough to skin them clean. He tried to get up, and Noah's foot just happened to be where the guy's wrist wanted to be. "We got a problem?" Noah asked to the air, which is a New Orleans way of telling everybody they're not crazy for seeing what they see. I dialed 911 because legally you call, even when you don't trust who might answer. I asked for park rangers first, then NOPD, and gave a description that would hold up later. Height, clothing. The exact word unicorn headphones, because the detail matters. While we waited, I checked the kids for shock. Not the dramatic kind. The subtle one that makes their mouths go flat and their eyes go too bright. I handed out napkins like badges. Told the littles that Miss Maya's Elbow Club awards go to anyone who scraped skin and kept breathing. Lila's hand found mine and squeezed so hard it hurt in the best way. "You did good," I told her, and meant it 100 times. The van finally tried to reverse out and clip Tasha's bumper. She didn't flinch. She lit them up. Horn, truck radio. The whole block knew, and yelled to a park ranger who was jogging over with that particular mix of annoyance and purpose you only see in municipal employees who have seen too much. The ranger took one look at the scene. Noah standing casual over an amateur. Me holding 3 kids and talking in my calm EMT voice. A community lined up like a human picket fence and made the right choice. "Everybody breathe. Nobody be a hero," he said, then did the small, huge thing. He put himself between the men and the exit. NOPD arrived 2 minutes later and made the wrong face when they recognized me, then corrected it when 2 moms in leggings started giving collective testimony like a Greek chorus. We saw him reach, I heard the radio. She said red light and we all froze. Crowd truth is messy, but it's heavy. The man Noah had pinned tried to buck once and failed. He was sweating now, mumbling the same word like a stuck record. Refinery, refinery said wait, refinery said later. He looked up and made the mistake of locking eyes with me like I was the thing he needed to convince. "Lady, you got it wrong," he said. That lazy, bored tone men use when they want you to hand them your doubt. "We're legit. We're security. I pointed to the kit, the cheap radio, the van with the mismatched plate screw. Real security doesn't need zip ties for kids, I said, and watched the light change behind his eyes when he realized the flimsy story wouldn't even get him out of a traffic court hallway. He shut down then, cool, guilty, or trained. I couldn't tell which, but not before he flinched at the word refinery coming out of his own mouth. It's always the detail they wish they'd kept. Cass arrived after the sirens, the loud response he promised. He didn't stride in like a hero. He walked like a dad at a school play who doesn't want to block anyone's view. He clocked me, clocked Lila, clocked Noah, then clocked the ranger, and said, "How can I help without stepping on toes?" The ranger, who had decided we were civilians acting more civilized than usual, said, "Keep folks back and find me a witness with a steady hand." Cass pointed to Tasha, who saluted with her phone like a flag. He came to where I was kneeling and crouched until he was eye level with Lila. "You good, Principessa?" he asked, and Lila, braver than I've ever been, grinned shaky and said, "I froze like a tree." He looked at me then, and I felt the thing I've tried not to need sink its teeth. Relief, anger, something hotter. "You did everything right," he said. Not the overblown kind of praise, just the kind that lands where your bones feel it. "We train," I said. "We promise." He nodded like we were in a huddle, and this was the part where you bump helmets and pretend you're not terrified. NOPD wanted statements. Preston materialized like he has a teleport app and said words about custody and counsel, while the ranger quietly shook my hand and muttered, "Bless y'all mamas." One of the officers, new babyface, trying hard to do the job clean, asked if I smelled anything chemical. And I told him the truth. No. Just fear and motor oil and the sugar syrup of a neighborhood trying to mind its business. He asked about the radio I heard, and I showed him the scanner log. "They're using FRS channels, probably with privacy codes," I said, and watched his eyebrows climb because not a lot of EMTs offer comms advice at a park. "It's a thing we do to keep ourselves safe," I added, and he wrote it down like it was a new word he might need later. When the men were finally cuffed and in cars, still muttering, still trying to look like the ground would open and swallow this mistake, I felt my adrenaline crash like a wave meeting a seawall. That's the worst part. The after. Your body cashes a check you didn't write and you stand there shaking like you're cold in August. Cass saw it before I did. He put his hand near my elbow, not on near, and asked, "Walk?" We did a slow loop under the oaks while the kids resumed their game like resilience is just recess renamed. He didn't talk at first, which is why I let him walk. Then he said, "I hate that the world has to see you in a fight to believe you." And something in me let go enough to laugh. "Welcome to womanhood," I said. He made a face at that. Half apology, half rage I recognize in myself. "You saved them," he said. "No," I corrected. "We saved them." I pointed at the moms, at Noah, at Tasha's truck angled like a stubborn mule, at Miss Etta polishing her whistle like a talisman. This is what it looks like when a neighborhood decides it's not today. By the time we got back to the bench, everything was back to almost normal. The ranger was filling out forms under the shade of a live oak like bureaucracy could keep the sun off. The lacrosse dad had traded his cinderblock hand for high fives. Tasha comped snowballs for every kid and made a show of tasting the blue raspberry like a sommelier. Noah flashed me a look from across the grass that said, "We'll talk later." And also, "Good work, Cap." Cass took the empty spot next to me on the bench and didn't crowd my air. He looked, for a second, like a man who wanted to ask for something that isn't logistical. I felt it too. This thing between us that's been building in the quiet. The way his voice goes softer around Lila. The way my hands stop shaking when he switches from tactics to listening. He reached up like he might tuck a stray curl behind my ear, and stopped because consent, because rules. I surprised both of us by closing the distance. It wasn't a movie kiss. It was quick and honest and cracked open something I'd been holding shut since the day Michael died. When I pulled back, I put my hand flat on his chest to anchor us both and said the condition I wrote in Sharpie on my own heart. "I want this, but only if you keep walking away from the back halls for good. Not a sermon, not a stunt, the boring kind of good that sticks. He nodded like vows were a language he'd finally learned. Hold me to it, he said. I am, I said, and felt the truth of it land in my bones. Lila barreled into us then with a mouth ringed electric blue and yelled, Mama, Mr. Leon says I get to pick the song tonight. And the world, rude and beautiful, started turning again. On the way out, as we loaded kids and coolers and a whistle with a brand, new legend into cars, the younger officer jogged up and said quietly, Ma'am, one of them said a word we're flagging. Refinery. Mean anything to you? I chewed my lip because the answer lived in a ledger and a recording and the kind of rage that looks like calm. It means we're not done, I said. And it means you should tell your boss to charge batteries in his radios and his conscience. He blinked like I'd handed him homework and then wrote it down. In the rear view. As we pulled away, I caught a last glimpse of Miss Etta holding court on a bench, giving the ranger a dissertation on whistles and womanhood. I thought about how close we'd come to a different story, and how many names never make the news because nobody had a truck and a whistle at the right minute. I kept thinking, this is why we plan, why we train, why we insist on boring rules and code words and beads clipped to backpacks. Because when bad men show up with cheap radios and expensive cruelty, a whole park can stand up and say in one voice, not today. The text from the unknown number sat there all night like a porch light. I wasn't sure I wanted to flip. I'm Patel. By morning, I answered with a time and a place I trusted, the church hall at St. Augustine, where the coffee is always too strong and the folding chairs squeak like they're telling on you. Cass wanted the meeting at Maison. I said no. Neutral ground, I told him, and he didn't argue, which told me he was learning the difference between control and safety. Asha Patel walked in 5 minutes early with a paper bag from District Donuts and the kind of face that says she's heard every stupid lie men tell themselves and still believes in paperwork. She clocked the dog, eared ledger, the thumb drive. My kid's bead clipped to my bag and set the donuts down like an offering. I read the preservation letter your counsel sent. She started. No small talk, but her voice had edges sanded by someone raised to say please and thank you, while navigating spaces that weren't built with her in mind. You have something that can pry up floorboards. You also have a problem with leaks on the local level. She didn't say the word untouchable. She didn't have to. Cass sat to my left, hands folded like a man at confession. And for once, he let somebody else lead. Asha slid a printed map across the table, the port, the riverfront warehouses, a big circle around a line of old brick under the I-10 where steel and concrete make cell coverage weird. You called it refinery on the recording, she said. There's an old sugar facility converted to storage. Delta rentals on 2 of the bays. My office has Title III in motion for a limited window if we can give a judge clean probable cause. She flashed a look at me on the word judge. Quick, like a warning. We do this my way or we don't do it, she added. No cowboys, no off-book muscle. We put them in rooms where microphones are better than guns. And we let the paper eat. Cass shifted like he wanted to argue habit, then stilled. Define my way, he said. And Asha laid it out like a recipe card. We soft, banter our way into a meat no one can later call entrapment. We don't spook the money men yet. We aim our first bite at middle management and their transport guys, and we thread everything through chain of custody so when the inevitable edited audio defense shows up, it dies on the vine. And if something goes sideways, Cass asked, because something always does, then you do the hardest thing, she said. You stand down unless it's life and death. My team gets paid to run into sideways. I watched his jaw work through the math and felt a strange thing, respect for a man deciding to be smaller on purpose. When she asked about the radio chatter in City Park, I pulled out my scanner logs like a proud nerd and showed her the timestamps and FRS channel numbers I thought I'd heard through the static. They're using bubble pack walkies with privacy codes, I said. Cheap, dumb, convenient, they probably think nobody's listening. Her mouth ticked. People like that never think the right people are listening. She looked at Cass. My team needs your eyes, not your hands. Observation posts on the river road, vehicle descriptions, who shakes whose hand. You don't run a blocker, you don't stage a collision, you don't lay a hand on anybody. Mr. Guidry, a nod to Preston, who was already scribbling, funnels everything to me sealed. If I see a single clip hit Instagram, I walk. It wasn't a threat, it was a boundary. Then she turned to me because she'd clocked that I was the one who knew where signals dropped and people moved like water. We need a corridor where we can move witnesses without lighting up their phones like Christmas, she said, and the maps in my head clicked on. Poidra's high, Rise Canyon around 5 p.m. is a mess for LTE, I said, and the Claiborne Underpass by Orleans Ave is a natural RF sync. If we time it on the half when the port cranes swing, you get free interference. Also, the streetcar throws enough electrical noise at certain turns to mask a handoff if somebody's piggybacking phones. She stared at me like I'd given her a new tool. You should teach my rookies, she said. And I shrugged because the truth is, women learn to make dead zones wherever we aren't allowed to be loud. We left with a plan built like scaffolding, 3 days to set the chessboard, a soft approach to a logistics guy who thought he was a boss, sealed orders sleeping in a judge's chambers until the last second, a quiet relocation of 2 witnesses. Asha's office had waiting in the wings, but wouldn't move without a clean corridor. We built the 3 no's on the whiteboard in the church kitchen, next to a sign about washing coffee urns. No unilateral moves, no leaks, no heroics. Cass took a picture of it and made it his lock screen like a man who knows temptation has teeth, back at Maison. Marla rolled a compliance cart into the office. Actual rolling cart. Color. Coded binders labeled divestitures, donor funds, cash flows, and started talking like a hurricane in reverse, pulling trouble off the walls faster than it could stick. Clinic account is clean, she said. Claiborne lease sale will close tomorrow. If anyone wants a paper cut, they can take a number. The Cass signed where she pointed, and then did the thing that would have gotten him laughed out of his own family a year ago. He called Declan and told him to take his cousin's keys to the river trucks. Temporary pause, he said. Observation only. I could hear Declan through the receiver from 3 feet away. A sermon about weakness, about enemies smelling blood, about boys who forget their fathers. Cass hung up, and his hands shook for exactly 1 second, then went still. He'll call cousins, not cops, he said. Old map thinking. I didn't touch him. I just stood in the doorway so he could see me, the way a person looks for horizon lines when a boat pitches. That night, after I tucked Lila in with Franklin's bow tie like it was a token against nightmares, I met Asha for coffee at a place that doubles as a laundromat, because cops never think to look where people fold fitted sheets. She told me about her dad's corner store in Houston, how the worst day wasn't the robbery, but the week after. Listening to neighbors who loved him say, "These things happen," like fate is a weather report. I do this because I want a different sentence, she said. I want these things got stopped, to be boring. She asked me why I hadn't run after City Park, why I keep walking into rooms where men think they can write my name on the chalkboard and erase it when they're done. I told her the truth. Running felt like letting Michael die twice. He wasn't a hero, I said. He was a tired man who hid a key because he didn't have a better plan in that moment. I'm making one. She nodded like the Venn diagram of women who pick up the tools left by men they loved is one big circle. The next morning was drills, not the tactical kind, the ordinary kind. We practiced the bead rule with the walking school bus like it was a game show. We picked a staging coffee shop where the chalkboard menu lists drinks nobody orders. And I taught Noah how to hear the hiss between words on cheap radios that means the person talking is on the far edge of range. He taught me how to take pictures over my shoulder using a reflection in a window without looking like a creep. We tested the Claiborne Underpass at 2, 4, and 5 p.m., walking the columns like a maze, counting how many bars dropped where, timing streetcar bells to mask a pass. I made laminated cards for 2 witnesses Asha would move, laminated because panic and paper sweat don't mix, with phone numbers, meet points, a stupid joke printed in the corner so I could break tension if I had to. What's Willie Nelson's favorite city? We'll get to it on the road again. Cass kept his distance from the mechanics, which had to feel like standing outside your own house, forehead on the window. He did the boring, righteous work instead, signing the grant agreement for the clinic, calling a contractor about fixing the busted sink in the staff bathroom, telling a vendor no to cash, only deliveries and yes to invoices, and a W-9. He looked angry sometimes, and I realized it wasn't at the rules. It was at the years he'd built muscle for all the wrong motions. By afternoon, Asha pinged. Short window, judge signed the Title III, limited scope. We need an approach to logistics guy tonight. Logistics guy turned out to be a man named Ortiz, who thought changing phones was a personality. Asha's idea was to bait him with something so mundane it wouldn't trip whatever rat instincts he has. Space in a cold storage unit accidentally freed by Cass's divestiture. A perfect place to hold product that isn't what the manifests say it is. We don't need him to confess to kidnapping, she said. We need him to talk about moving timetables and who tells him to move them. She asked if I wanted to be in the room. I said no, not because I was scared of him, but because there are rooms women walk into and immediately become props, and I wanted the tape clean. My job would be keeping the corridor open, moving one of her witnesses from a Motel 6 that smelled like lost hope to the safe staging without lighting up our phones like fireworks. Dead zone run? She asked. And I nodded. We moved at dusk because the city hums just right then. Horns, streetcars, music leaking from doors. I made the call that put a streetcar between my car and the tail I suspected, but hadn't seen. Asha followed the opposite edge of the map 2 blocks over, with a woman who'd been waiting 3 years to say what she knew without a man deciding she was hysterical. Under Claiborne. Everything went staticky and slow. The columns wore their murals. Saints, second, line umbrellas, faces of people who made this place and didn't get plaques for it. And I felt something like a blessing run through the concrete. We swapped cars by the tire shop where the owner owes Miss Bernice a favor for reasons I didn't ask about. On Poydras, the buildings rose like bookends, and my phone bars dropped one by one like a countdown. I used the lull to send Cass a single word, second, line, so he'd lock Maison's doors and run the drill we practice for when the city gets too curious. Lights down, cash locked, staff gathered. Nobody plays hero. When the witness was finally inside Asha's staging and I could stop flexing every muscle in my body, I parked by the flood wall and cried the quiet kind you can hide by staring at the river. A boat horn answered like a joke. Cass texted a picture of Lila coloring a trumpet on the office floor with Mr. Leon pretending not to help. We're fine. 2 words. I believed him. Ortiz did exactly what Asha said he would. A man like that loves to show he understands calendars. He bragged about bays and time slots and a judge who keeps the ink wet without saying a name, which is how cowards pretend they're clever. But he said enough. The schedule code, the maintenance windows for cameras at the yard, and a phrase that made Asha's eyes flick to me even though I wasn't in the room. B signs the work orders so the cameras nap. On the ledger in my bag, next to the line where Michael had written Cam down, work order signed by B. I felt that letter burn like a brand. I wanted to run to the courthouse and shout names. I wanted to break something that looked like a seal. I didn't. I texted Asha got it, and she replied sealed, and I let the paper do what we promised we'd let it do. Later that night, when the office was quiet and the staff had gone home with leftover cupcakes from a birthday we'd remembered to celebrate, Cass leaned on the doorframe and watched me copy numbers from Michael's ledger into a neat list for Asha. My handwriting, the same block letters I'd used for non-negotiables. I'm trying not to want the simple solution, he said, honest in a way that would have offended me a month ago. The one where I call 3 men and burn the storage units to the ground and tell you it's handled. I didn't look up. I just kept writing because sometimes staying busy is mercy. You want to keep people from getting hurt, I said. Violence is just the fastest story your hands remember. He came closer, careful, like walking up on a skittish animal, and set a glass of water next to my elbow. What do you want? He asked. It wasn't a trick. A city where my daughter can count her way across a park without some man turning her into a calendar, I said. A life where our good choices are boring. A partner who knows the difference between being strong and being hard. He put his palm on the non-negotiables copy on the fridge and said, "Then I will be boring so she can be loud." It made me want him in a way that had nothing to do with rescue. It made me want to live long enough to see him keep that promise when nobody's watching. At midnight, Asha sent the text nobody admits hoping for. Title 3 caught a whisper. Ortiz confirmed refinery meet. 48 hours. Logistics +2 from Delta. Work orders already queued. My stomach did that drop and lift. Fear and relief in the same breath. I sent back "we prep" and then added, "Because old habits die hard and some prayers wear jeans. No cowboys." She answered with a donut emoji, which I decided was FBI for copy that. I turned the scanner off on purpose, laid the key back under my phone case like setting a stone where it belongs, and crawled into bed next to my kid, who had fallen asleep on my pillow and drooled a small star. Through the window, the city was doing what it does. Horns, laughter, somebody practicing trumpet 3 doors down, missing every other note and not giving up. Hope is not a speech. I kept thinking, it's a map and 3 no's and a man learning to keep his hands open. In 2 days, we'd walk into the old refinery with microphones and warrants instead of anger and wishful thinking. We'd try to end something without becoming it. We'd see if the paper could eat. We staged at dawn because bad men love the cover of Late Afternoon, and I wanted time to get my breathing right. The refinery wasn't a refinery anymore. Just an old sugar plant with brick ribs and catwalks that rattled when a barge pushed upriver. The air had that burnt, molasses smell you either love or decide to hate on principle. We parked an unmarked white van by a chain. Link fence posted with 3 different no trespassing signs written by 3 different kinds of stubborn. Asha's team built out their small world like they'd done it in church basements and county fairgrounds across America. Cables taped to floorboards, clipboards, a thermos that could double as a weapon, an evidence table you'd be scared to get crumbs on. She handed me a headset and gave me the look. "Observation is a job," she said. "You leave heroics to the underpaid." I saluted her with the donut, because that's our language now. And she let the corner of her mouth twitch before turning into the woman who briefs federal judges. Cass stayed away because we agreed he had to. He hugged Lila at Maison under Mr. Leon's watch and sent me a picture of them reading on the office couch. Her braid crooked, his mouth trying not to smile like an idiot. He texted, "Non-negotiables taped to the fridge. We're boring, promise." I wrote back, "Hold it. Quarterback." He replied with a tiny football emoji because men. At 9, Ortiz's truck slid into Bay 3 like a man who uses turn signals only to amuse himself. He got out in a jacket that must have been waterproofed with arrogance and did the hand to chest, chin, lift thing at 2 guys in hoodies who didn't look each other in the eye. Mics we'd planted the day before picked up their voices clean until they walked under a steel beam where sound goes to die. Asha touched her earpiece. "We'll get enough in the clear," she murmured. "Stay patient." Then the thing you count on happened, an uncounted variable. A black Tahoe rolled in hot and crooked, and when the driver's door swung wide, my mouth went dry. Brian Hale got out like the concrete owed him a kiss. He didn't glance around because he thinks his eyes are the only ones that matter. He went straight to Ortiz and said the one word I needed to hear to keep myself from bolting. "Schedule." Not hello, not code. Schedule. Like a man who believes timetables are just versions of consent. Ortiz puffed up. "We're on the same page," he said. "Bay 3, 1600, Cam's nap from 15 till 25. The work order is signed." He tapped a folder like a teacher showing his homework. B's locked it down. He said B like a letter cushioned in fear. In my mind, the ledger lit up. Cam down. Work order signed by B. Asha sat up straighter. "Repeat the name," she whispered to nobody. Come on, give it to me." They didn't. Men like that don't say full names out loud if they can help it. But Brian did the thing he always does. He got bored with caution. "You sure your judge won't catch heat?" he asked in that lazy chew voice that turned my stomach at City Park. "She has friends," Ortiz said. "She sardines, we don't make it her problem." I should have been happy. That's probable cause walking itself onto a silver platter. Instead, I felt that hot, electric shake run my spine, the one that makes your hands remember how easy it would be to end a man. Asha touched the patch cord on the recorder like it was a rosary. "We're there," she said quietly to her tech. "Hold staging. No movement until I call it. Title 3 is live. Paper first." I reminded my lungs how to be ribs around air. "Mics don't care that you're shaking. They just work or they don't. One of ours didn't, right as Brian started on a story about the mom who tried to play hero. The magnetized mic we'd stuck to a steel brace hiccuped and slid. The waveform on our laptop flattened like someone had laid a hand on its throat. We needed that mic because the other angle was chewing static. Asha cursed under her breath and looked at me. She didn't have to say it. I'd scouted the beams. I'm small, and I've spent half my adult life climbing over mess to get to someone who's trying to die. 40 seconds, she said. You're a shadow. You're a rumor. No one sees you. I put my EMT jacket on because it's the one uniform in this country that buys you 3 seconds of grace in places where men think they own the exits. Noah squeezed my wrist on my way out of the van. "Trees and ants," he said. Our stupid shorthand for freezing catalog. And then I was in it. Past the chain, link gap we'd cut last night, up a set of stairs that sang, along a catwalk that didn't like my weight. From up there, the sugar house looked like every bad idea I've ever run into. Everything rusty and too quiet, with men using their inside voices to organize harm. I slid my hand over the beam, felt the mica with my fingertips, and clicked it into place on the seam like kissing a loose tooth back into its socket. The sound came back in my ear so clean, it numbed me. "Collateral didn't pan out," Brian was saying, amused with himself. "The woman learned tricks I didn't think she had. The kid froze good, though. Somebody trained her." I didn't breathe for a count of 8 because breathe and noise are cousins. I was backing up, slow and stupid, careful, when a screw that's probably been sitting there since 1971 snapped under my heel. The sound wasn't loud, it was precise. Brian's head tipped, a dog hearing a mouse in the wall. He turned, eyes scanning shadow and metal, and landed on me like I'd introduced myself. "Look at that," he said, pleased. He spread his arms like this was a magic trick he'd planned. "Read about your gala act, sweetheart. You do well with crowds." He started up the stairs like he was meeting me for brunch. I could have run. I could have used the advantage of height and speed and the way fear makes time rubbery. Instead, I did the thing I tell rookies to do when a scene goes sideways. You slow the movie down. I put one foot into the crossbar and braced my back against the beam the way we do in the back of rigs when a patient bucks. "You never were good at picking rooms," I said, loud enough for the mic to love me. "Church basements and parks have ears. Warehouses do, too." He smiled like a teacher tired of a smart kid. "Your husband loved rooms like this," he said, almost tender. "Quiet. You know he was going to go to the feds? Brave little habit of his." It knocked me back. The way he used love casually, like it was a resource he controlled. "Break lines," I said, "because sometimes you say the worst thing out loud to make it solid enough to step over." He shrugged. "Things break," he replied. And that was when I knew I wanted him to live long enough to hear a judge say his number out loud. Asha's voice in my ear said, "Hold, 30 seconds." And I realized she wasn't talking to me anymore. She was talking to a stack of cars idling a block away full of people who get paid to introduce doors to their new hinges. Ortiz yelled something about schedules. The hoodies shuffled like they just remembered they were wearing bones. Brian climbed another step, casual, and pulled a gun out like it was a lint roller. "You know what I hate?" he asked no one. "Women who think rules are for men." He lifted it just enough to make a point. I kept my hands visible and my feet where gravity liked them. "You know what I hate?" I said, with the calm teacher's use when they don't want to swear. "Men who forget microphones are for everyone." His eyes flicked left. That little tell I'd learned to read a year ago. He'd clocked the mic. He brought the gun up a hair, and that's when the world popped. "Federal agents!" cracked the air from 3 directions at once. A heavy metal door coughed open. Boots, commands, the sound of somebody's plan getting drafted into a different future. Brian stepped up into my space like a child trying to make a point at recess. He shoved the barrel near my jaw and said, "Too soft for most people and just loud enough for my ear. If I leave here, I still leave with your name." Behind him, Ortiz bolted for a side gate. Noah came from nowhere and performed the politest tackle I've ever seen. Arms around waist, momentum into a stack of pallets. No extra hurt. Brian's gun hand twitched. It doesn't take much for a finger to forget what a trigger means. I thought about Michael and about how grief wants to pretend violence is a kind of math. Then I thought about Lila, coloring a trumpet. I didn't grab for the gun. I grabbed the rail and stepped sideways, just enough to put steel between his barrel and my face. And I said, to my mic, to the room, to the people with the paperwork. He said she, the judge, signs work orders, camera naps, initial B. He swung wild at the word judge because bullies hear it like a slur. He missed because God loves a catwalk. The gun skittered against diamond plate. I didn't kick it. I stepped back and raised my hands. Agents appeared like they do in the movies if you've never been in a room like this, and exactly how they do in real life if you have on angles, not through the middle, with their faces set to the setting that keeps everyone breathing. "Drop it!" they barked at a man who no longer had it. Brian looked at me like he couldn't compute a woman not picking up what he threw at her. Then he smiled again, because some men are just made of rot. "You think you can hold a line?" he said as they pulled him to his knees. "You don't know how high B goes." I thought about Asha's little map and judges with names that ride around in other people's mouths like badges. I said, loud, because mics like declarations too. I don't need to know how high. I just need a door that shuts. Down on the floor, amid pallets and bad decisions. Ortiz kept saying refinery, like a prayer gone rancid. Somebody in a hoodie did the math and put his hands behind his head before being asked. In my ear, Asha exhaled once, like a diver breaking surface. "We have it," she said. "Nobody be a cowboy, nobody take a bow." I climbed down slowly because shaking on stairs is a good way to reenact the wrong kind of story. A female agent with kind eyes and a voice that could calm a church riot put a hand out for balance and then checked my jaw with a glance that told me she had sisters. "You good?" she asked, and "I'm bored," I lied, because boredom is safety's disguise. Outside the bay doors, I caught a glimpse of the river and felt a different kind of drop in my stomach. Another black SUV had pulled up across the street, one I recognized not by license plate but by posture. Declan Rourke leaned against it like a man waiting for someone to decide. He didn't try to come in. He watched. Then he peeled away without a blink, making a call he'd rehearsed in his bones for 30 years. I didn't have to hear it to know. Family wasn't going to go quietly. On cue. My phone buzzed with a text from Preston. Maison, secure. Glass broken front. Cass, grazed. Lila, unharmed. Mr. Leon, furious. I saw it in my head without needing a camera. The brick through the lower pane. The quick flinch. Cass pulling Lila down like a linebacker. Mr. Leon materializing with a broom he doesn't need. Noah sending two idiots home reconsidering life. I called anyway. Cass answered with a voice that wanted to sound lighter than pain allows. "We're fine," he said. "It's dramatic. Headlines love glass." "Are you bleeding?" I asked. "Because I'm an EMT and because I'm me." "It's show blood," he said. "Real shallow. Mr. Leon says I'm not allowed to stain his rugs." In the background, I heard Lila say very seriously, "Papa, you're not allowed to ruin rugs." And my heart did that dumb thing hope makes it do. Back in the bay, agents were reading rights, marking evidence bags, doing paper the way it eats. Asha strode toward me with that little donut box under her arm, like she's determined to write a new brand of Fed, one who feeds you while she takes your house apart. She didn't hug me. She put her palm on my forearm and pressed once like she was checking my pulse. "We got him," she said. "We got Ortiz. We got enough of refinery to wake up a prosecutor who's been asleep with his eyes open. And..." She hesitated, the way you do when bad news and good news share a gate. "We got something else." She held up a phone in an evidence bag. On the lock screen was a photo of a dock party, sunset beers, a pile of crawfish, the kind of grin men wear when they've never been told no. Standing shoulder to shoulder with Ortiz was a face I knew from a family meeting with casseroles of opinion. Finn Rourke, Cass's cousin, the one who thought I'd turned a man soft. In the notifications was a text preview I didn't need but saw anyway. Be signed. Send thanks to Judge Beauchamp. Tonight, 1600 Todd F. My stomach sank and then steadied, the way it does when the gurney hits the ER threshold and you know you can finally let go of some weight. He's going to have to cut blood, I said, and Asha nodded. I'm not asking him to be a hero, she said. I'm asking him to be a witness. She watched my face. Can he do that? I thought about a man signing a divestiture while his hand shook for 1 second and then didn't, about calling his uncle to pull keys, about standing in a kitchen while his family called him traitor and not raising his voice. Yes, I said, if he can do it to himself first. She nodded like she'd gambled on the right horse and turned back to the paper that was about to start chewing on a judge's last name. By late afternoon, Bay 3 looked like a crime scene in a procedural, but with weirder lighting and better paperwork. Ortiz had stopped performing and started doing math on outcomes. Brian sat with his back against a pillar, smirking at everyone like he was going to a better party later. If I were you, he said as I walked by with an agent to sign my witness form, I'd keep your kid off the news. Fame makes people greedy. I stopped because you can walk past some things, and some things require the courtesy of a firm door. If I were you, I said, evenly, I'd practice hearing my dock number in other people's mouths. He laughed, which is what cowards do when their legs remember they're attached to knees. I signed the form. The agent countersigned. Paper stacked into paper. The river went on flowing like it always does when humans think they invented consequence. We met back at Maison as the light turned that soft pink New Orleans makes when it wants you to forgive it for humidity. The front pane was boarded with plywood somebody had spray, painted with a second line umbrella because even damage here wears art. Lila ran into me so hard I lost a step, then shoved a Band-Aid into my hand. It had cartoon crawfish on it. For Papa, she said. Mr. Leon sniffed and muttered about certain men being banned for life, then hugged me so fast it almost didn't happen. Cass came out of the office with a strip of gauze under his sleeve and eyes that looked older and clearer. He didn't ask if we were okay. He showed me a document on a clipboard. Board resolution. Removal of director. Cooperation agreement. U.S. Attorney's Office. Finn's name was printed where it needed to be printed. Cass had signed with the same pen he'd used on the non-negotiables. His hand didn't shake this time. I'm not going to make speeches, he said. I'm going to make phone calls that ruin some men's afternoons. He looked toward the kitchen like he could see his uncle through walls. And then I'm going to make gumbo like a man who knows there are still mouths to feed. We stood in the doorway, the boarded window catching the last light, and watched as Asha's press release crossed the evening news crawl in polite sentences. Federal task force executes sealed warrants at riverfront facility. Several arrests, investigation ongoing. No names, not yet. Just the shape of a truth that had started with a key taped under a phone case and a woman tired of running. Lila tugged my sleeve. Did we win? She asked. I thought about Brian's smirk, about Finn's lock screen, about a judge with a letter for a shield, about Declan's SUV turning away from a door for the first time in his life. We held the line today, I said. That counts. Cass slipped his hand into mine, not to claim, just to anchor. Tomorrow we hold it again, he said. And the day after, I said. He squeezed once, quick, like saying grace without lowering your head. Late that night, after Lila fell into the sleep she'd earned, and the staff had drifted out in 2s and 3s under Mr. Leon's eye, we sat at the office table with the ledger pages between us and the crawfish magnet holding our non-negotiables like a flag. Cass wrote his statement for Asha in his own hand. No dictation. No edits from a man in a better suit. It said, in clean print, I, Cassian Rourke, hereby affirm under penalty of perjury. It ended with, I waive privilege as to the following matters. It wasn't movie brave. It was paperwork brave. When he finished, He set the pen down and looked at me like a man who had finally found the right size for his hands. "You said you wanted boring," he said, almost smiling. "I do," I said. "I want so much boring, we have to invent hobbies." He nodded toward the closed kitchen. "I'll learn to bake," he said. "God help us," I said. And we laughed the kind of laugh that lives at the edge of tears because relief and grief share a hallway. Before we turned out the lights, I slid the key back under my phone case. It didn't feel hot anymore. It felt like what it always was supposed to be, a tool, not a talisman. Asha texted right then with 2 words in a period that felt heavier than the river. Beauchamp. Sealed. I exhaled the breath I'd been holding since a judge's name became a letter. Tomorrow would be loud again. Arraignments, headlines, family fallout. A city deciding which part of itself to feed. Tonight, there was a man with a bandaged arm making gumbo in a kitchen that used to hide its back door and now leaves the lights on when the staff eats. There was a kid asleep with a bead clipped to her backpack like a badge. There was a ledger on a table that had finally been read into the kind of record men can't laugh off. And there was a woman who didn't pick up a gun when a man offered one, standing at a window that had been broken and repaired, holding a line she chose for herself and the people she loves. 6 months is not a long time, but it's enough for a city to change its mind about you. We opened the clinic on a Wednesday because that's when Miss Etta's walking group can swing by and bully folks into getting their blood pressure checked. The sign over the door is simple: Maison Community Clinic. No names. And the waiting room smells like pine cleaner and coffee because sometimes dignity is just clean floors and a good pot. Cass wore a volunteer tee shirt that fit him funny in the shoulders and took orders from a nurse practitioner half his size like he was born to it. Asha came with a box of donuts and the same warning look she always gives me when she's about to say something that lives in a sealed envelope. "Hale pled to 3 counts, she said quietly over the donut box like we were haggling over sprinkles. He thought he could keep his badge a little longer if he sang. He lost that fantasy fast. Beauchamp resigned this morning and appeared in front of a magistrate this afternoon. Finn is cooperating. Declan's counsel asked for a meeting. He's not as brave as his legend." I didn't smile. Relief and anger use the same muscles, and I saved them for running. I checked the crash cart, restocked gauze, and kept one ear on Lila reading to Franklin, who now wears his bow tie like a co-founder. The trumpet player from the restaurant sat in the corner, pretending to read the Times, pick and humming hallelujah under his breath. Softer than usual, like he understood hospitals without being told. I thought about going to every hearing and making a speech, and then I remembered whose appetite that feeds. Instead, I went to the one that mattered, the day the court said Brian's name with a number attached to it. I sat behind Asha, hands quiet in my lap, and when the judge asked if anyone wanted to speak, I stood because my knees know what to do now. I didn't talk about monsters. I talked about planning. I held up an EKG strip from a panic attack in the station, where some other woman's heart ran too fast for too long, and I said, "This is what fear looks like on paper. We can pretend these stories are about individual men who made bad choices, or we can admit they're about a system that schedules harm like shipments." Brian smirked like smirking could be currency forever. The judge, who was not Beauchamp, because the world at least learned that lesson, said the line I needed to hear: "Custody remanded." It wasn't television. It was paperwork with a spine. Outside the courthouse, Asha didn't do a victory lap. She checked her watch and said she had a witness interview in 20 minutes and asked if I wanted a ride back to the clinic because her AC works better than my car's. We stopped at a red light where a kid in a Saints jersey was selling water out of a cooler, and she bought 2 and handed me one like it was communion. "You did good," she said. I said, "We did steady," because that's the only adjective I trust now. The fallout at Maison was loud in the opening and then weirdly quiet. The cousins who like to make business sound like weather stopped dropping by. The vendors who used to wink at the side door learned how to email invoices. The night we took Finn's name off the board in the office, Cass didn't make a speech. He took out a screwdriver and got on a chair and passed me the screws like we were hanging a shelf. Afterward, he walked 2 blocks with me and Lila to the corner store and bought her a freezer pop and himself a bottle of water and me a scratch, Off, I didn't scratch because luck feels like a language I'm not fluent in yet. At home, I tucked the little key back under my phone case the way I always do and realized my hands weren't shaking. The next morning, I closed the safe deposit box with Ms. Patel on speakerphone and a bank clerk who tried to sell me a CD at 2.8% APR. I left the ledger copies where they needed to live, signed my name, and walked out into obnoxiously normal sunshine like it belonged to me again. The clinic learned its rhythms fast. Tuesday nights are blood sugar and flu shots. Thursday afternoons are bring your meds and your questions. We'll translate the labels. Lila started calling it our hospital and drew a crooked mural for the kids' corner with a rainbow and a fire truck and a very large dog wearing a tie. Mr. Leon started a take one, leave one diaper shelf because he's a practical prophet. Miss Bernice shows up with a clipboard and a glare and somehow gets grumpy men to schedule dental cleanings. Noah teaches a free class once a month called Situational Awareness for Parents and cracks jokes about Mayo Clinic of Bourbon Street until people stop being embarrassed to practice saying no in a loud voice. Cass is boring on purpose, which I didn't know could be attractive in a man until I watched him write checks to things that don't get ribbon cuttings, the battered sink in the back bathroom, the extra AC unit for the little lab that overheats, the stipend for Gloria, because therapy works best when it's not a luxury. Every time he does something small and righteous, I feel my shoulders drop a quarter inch. Boring is a love language if you stick with it. We still get hit with ghosts. The first time I saw Beauchamp's name in print, next to words like honest services fraud, I thought I would feel triumphant, and instead I wanted to throw up. There's no satisfaction in a system swallowing one of its own if you're honest about how many it spit back out. Declan sent a message through a lawyer I'd never heard of, a bland little note that said family is family. Cass read it once, put it in a drawer, and then called Asha to tell her about it because that is what doing it right looks like. No secret handshakes, no late night nostalgia for rooms that made you feel big. When he had to sit for a proffer and say out loud what he knew and what he chose to ignore for years before I ever ran into his restaurant, he came home quiet and washed the dishes and then told me the ugliest thing without asking me to forgive it. We don't do absolution in speeches. We do it in trash night and budget meetings and walking the bead, clipped kid to school so she knows who shows up on morning sidewalks. Asha never does celebrations, but she let me talk her into one small we made it this far thing at St. Augustine's Hall, where nobody minds if you bring a crock pot and kids run underfoot. The trumpet player played 3 songs and took requests from Leela, who made everyone clap off beat until the joy felt real. The news ran a polite segment earlier that day. No names, just a community clinic opens in Central City powered by small donors and a restaurant group's foundation. The kind of story that usually goes last, so anchors can smile before weather. Tasha catered with snowballs in November, because we earned it. And Miss Etta did an aggressive toast that was mostly about whistles and motherhood, and the day she stopped apologizing for being loud. Asha hugged me with one arm and a paper plate in the other and said, "Do not quote me on a podium, but I needed this." And then she went back to work because she's built like that. We sent her with a dozen leftover donuts and a sticker Lila made that said paper eats in bubble letters. The proposal wasn't a down on one knee thing. It was Saturday morning at the clinic between fixing a busted cabinet hinge and taping a sign about flu shots in English and Spanish. Cass came in from the storage room smelling like cleaners and sawdust, holding a manila envelope. "2 things," he said, sliding it onto the table like it might spook. Inside was a simple band that didn't glitter, no cameras, no headlines, and a stack of documents, power of attorney, healthcare directives, a will that said Lila's name exactly right. "This is me not promising," he said, voice steady in a way I trust now. "This is me putting it where a judge can read it when life gets weird. And this is me asking if you want boring forever with me." Lila barged in right then with a sticker book and announced, "Mr. Leon says boring is grown up for safe," like she'd been waiting her whole life to settle that debate. I looked at the ring, at the paperwork, at the man who learned to choose paperwork over legend. And I said yes, with the same tone I use when I tell Lila to grab her backpack and let's go. Practical, sure, ready. We didn't second line. We signed in front of a notary who wore a Saints jersey and smelled like gumbo and handed us the stamps like medals. The last piece of the old story I had to carry was Michael. We took Lila to the river on a Sunday and told stories that were true and kind without lying. I brought the Polaroid from the box, the one with powdered sugar on my shirt and his cap backward, and we let Lila ask questions that smart kids ask when adults choose honesty. "Was he scared?" she asked. And I said, "Yes, and brave at the same time, like most good people." We lit a candle at St. Augustine, the kind that flickers too fast. And I put the little key on the ledge with the ones people leave when they can't carry a thing anymore. I whispered thank you because grief is not a debt. It's a map. And then I went home with the people I'm mapping for now. On Lila's first day back at school after the Beauchamp news, the walking school bus looked like a parade without the brass. The resource officer saluted us like we were his boss. The cafeteria worker saved Lila an apple because she likes the crunchy ones. And Mr. Leon handed her the yellow duck umbrella even though the forecast was clear, because luck is a skill. At the corner, Tasha leaned out her truck and shouted that the clinic needed a calendar for moms, not doctors. And Noah pretended to take notes like a secretary and then actually did, which made me love all of them more than I can say. My scanner still sits on the nightstand. I still count in fours when the air goes thin. Bad men still exist, and power still tries to move like water downhill. But now, there's a clinic with a little lending library and a kid's mural on the wall. And there's a restaurant that closes its books clean. And there's a federal agent who brings donuts and calls me when a rumor needs to be measured against a map. There's a man who writes checks to boring things and lets me hold him to a list we tape to a fridge with a crawfish magnet. There's a girl who freezes like a tree on command and runs like a comet when you say green light. We didn't fix a city. We held a line until other hands found it. That's the part I want on record, not the raid or the headlines or who smirked in which courtroom. But the way routine won. How a dog with a bow tie turned chaos into a waiting room. How beads clipped to backpacks became passwords. How a whistle in the park out sang a van with zip ties. How paper ate, because enough people fed it the truth. People ask sometimes, "Are you happy now?" Like happiness is a binary. I tell them this. We're steady. We're loud when we need to be. We sleep better. We make plans that don't require miracles. And when the trumpet player closes the restaurant on Thursdays with hallelujah, Lila leans against Cass's shoulder, and I rest my palm on the table and feel in the bones. That boring can be the bravest kind of love there is.